All right, let's get to the next part here. This is about Ghislaine Maxwell and her relationship with the Clintons. Let's put this up here on the screen. Epstein files reveal scope of Ghislaine Maxwell's role in the Clinton circle, and specifically raising some $1 million for the Clinton Global Initiative. And they specifically say that she took part in the budget discussions related to the first CGI conference, talked through challenges with both Clinton aides, the company that produced the inaugural event, and arranged to wire $1 million, quote, for the work on the Clinton project. The source of the money is unclear, including whether Mr. Epstein provided the funds. However, the emails show that he was aware of the payment. Epstein at one point wrote to her, quote, "Ask him to tell you why I million now and where it will be going." So maybe it was his money, wasn't it? All of this took place in 2004 before the 2006 indictment. But it shows how deeply, remember, this is a woman invited literally to the Clinton wedding in that infamous photo, and how deeply she was enmeshed with the Clinton family, who after, they lose the White House, or after they lose in 2000, but they leave the White House. They're obsessed with one thing. How do I become generationally wealthy as quickly as humanly possible and whitewash my image from the Lewinsky scandal? So what do? Hillary runs for Senate. She becomes the carpetbagger in chief from New York. And Bill, who moves to New York, is like, I'm going to double down on all this humanitarian work with my Clinton Global Initiative. Except the Clinton Global Initiative, I covered so much of this during the Clinton campaign, becomes a slush fund, basically for the Hillary administration in waiting, wiring tens of millions of dollars from across the globe. In many cases, different governments are sending them money expressly to set up meetings with Hillary because she was a former Secretary of State. She's going to become, potentially the next president, which is what everybody thought back in 2016. And Clinton himself also used it as a reputational machine, which he can fly across the world private, in jets for the rest of his life, basically, for humanitarian work. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein, very critical nodes in all of that, sourcing sketchy money. That's what they do. So this just proves already the depth of their relationship, which, of course, we did know that, but it's pretty amazing to see Epstein there being like, ask him to tell you why I'm sending you $1 million. Like, that's crazy stuff.
It's interesting in all of this. Clearly, Ghislaine was really on the inside with the Clintons.
Yes, she was.
And Epstein recognized, obviously, that this is another powerful, node of power that he wants to be in with. And so, the CGI money and fostering this relationship appears to have been a strategic play from him, unsurprisingly. And the other thing that's interesting in this reporting is that, and again, this is not surprising, but it's interesting to see it lay down. Bill Clinton saw Davos and how much influence it had and how powerful it was and what a brand builder it was. And he was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do my own version of Davos with like a, liberal, more overtly liberal humanitarian bent rather than Davos is focused around like business elites exclusively. He's like, let me do that. I'll have the business elites, but I'll also have like the global humanitarian class as well. And so that's really the birth of the Clinton Global Initiative. So not only did they want to amass money, but they also wanted to amass power and be the central node in this sort of like global influence network. That was the whole thing. So of course Jeffrey Epstein's gonna want to get involved with that, right? He's like, this is my whole bag. This is what I do. Let me see how I can get myself involved here. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is, like Saagar was saying, Ghislaine being there at Chelsea's wedding, and weren't Hillary and Bill at Trump and Melania's wedding as well? Yeah, like, and Ivanka and Chelsea were friends. We think of them as these bitter rivals. They were in the same social circles. They were going to each other's events, supporting each other's things, going to each other's weddings, etc. They are all part of the same class, the Epstein class. And Ryan was saying, like, in some ways, the class solidarity of the billionaires and the global elites is rather inspiring. They really are there for each other. They really have this tight-knit network. And I think that's important for all of us to keep in mind. And that came out very clearly in this recent Trump comment where he gets asked about Bill Clinton. Now, the backstory here is Clinton has been subpoenaed to come testify before Congress. Initially, he was saying, no, I'm not going to do it. And, I guess was willing to risk jail time the way Steve Bannon went to prison for, refusing to appear in spite of being subpoenaed. He has now changed his mind, and we can put this up on the screen and say, okay, fine, I will testify. And he says here, I have called for the full release of the Epstein files. I've provided a sworn statement of what I know. Just this week, I've agreed to appear in person before the committee. Still not enough for Republicans on the House Oversight Committee. He goes on to say, now Chairman Comer says he wants cameras, but only behind closed doors. Who benefits from this arrangement? It's not Epstein's victims who deserve justice, not the public who deserve the truth. Serves only partisan interests. This is not fact-finding, it's pure politics. I will not sit idly as they use me as a prop in a closed-door kangaroo court by Republican Party running scared. If they want answers, let's stop the games and do this the right way in a public hearing where the American people can see for themselves what this is really about. So Bill Clinton is set to testify, after having been subpoenaed. And again, Clinton, Trump, same circles, same contacts, et cetera. Big question what Bill might be able to say about Trump and his associates and what exactly is going on with this whole Epstein situation. And so now when Trump gets asked about Bill Clinton and about Hillary Clinton, suddenly, they're good people actually. Actually really kind of like these guys. Let's take a listen to that.
It bothers me that somebody's going after Bill Clinton. See, I like Bill Clinton. I still like Bill Clinton.
What do you like about him?
I liked his behavior toward me. I thought he got me. He understood me.
I like Bill Clinton. He understood me. He says Hillary, she's a very accomplished woman, ultimately. Very different tone here. It sort of reminds of when he got asked about Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yep.
In the first administration, he said, you know what? I wish her well.
Well, first of all, I do want to say I support Bill Clinton for publicly testifying. I support that 100%. Let's do it out in the open.
Absolutely.
With the camera, there's nothing better to see Bill. Look, he's smart. He's a wily fox. He had plenty of Lewinsky dodging and what was that scandal? Is it Whitewater? Man, it's a throwback. It's been the Rose Law Firm. Google it if you're interested. If you want to go and relive some of the 1990s. But the whole point with the Clintons, obviously, is that I'm glad that they're going to testify publicly, and ultimately it's nice that they are being forced to actually have to come and answer some questions. But the bigger point is, it reminds me of that George Carlin quote, like, it's a big club and you're not in it. And that's really what it is actually all about. And it's like that famous photo of George W. Bush in that selfie with Michelle Obama, and they're like, kindness. I'm like, no, there's nothing cool about that. You know? Like, sorry, no, actually. Like, Bush, no. We don't do that with people like George W. Bush. And this is why the whole Dick Cheney thing bothered me. I'm like, they're like, oh, he died a hero. I'm like, oh, because he stood up to Trump. I'm like, oh, he died a hero? Really? I guess it's been long enough I could speak ill of the dead. If you remember whenever we had to react to his death, we're like, well, he's dead. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's how I feel about Dick Cheney. That's how I feel about Fauci. There's like a small list of people who I'm like, no, fuck you, till the day you die. Like, I literally don't care about you at all.
Well, and
we shouldn't, be resuscitating your image or any of that.
No. Yeah. George W. Bush? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And again, the Bushes and the Trumps, supposedly this bitter rivalry, et cetera. I mean, remember Bill Barr, who is Attorney General at the time that Epstein dies, he also served in the H.W. Bush administration.
Yes.
Like, that's where he comes from. And his dad, of course, famously is the one who hires Jeffrey Epstein at the Dalton School, in spite of the fact that Epstein had no qualifications to be put in, to that position at this very prestigious school. Donald Barr also wrote a very strange
I know.
Sci-fi book about, some like sex slave enterprise, et cetera. So you can go look that one up too, if you really want to go super down the rabbit hole. But in any case, so much more connectivity and so much more shared interests between all of these people than the enmity that they like to portray publicly.
Very, very true. All right, let's continue. This one is so wild. So I had known, and Ryan did a story about the Rothschild relationship with Epstein, obviously significantly important just because it's one of the most powerful banking houses in all of Europe, long, of course, been connected to the rise and falls of many of the power brokers on the continent. But with their relationship with Epstein was not only deeper, but directly tied to our own country and our government. Let's put this up here on the screen. I had no idea about this. It says how the House of Rothschild became entangled with Epstein. What they specifically point to is that back in 2015, in December, after months of turmoil, the Swiss private bank owned by the Rothschild dynasty was closing in on a multi-million-dollar settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice for its part in helping rich Americans hide their assets. Behind the scenes, the group's French chief, Ariane de Rothschild, had tasked Jeffrey Epstein and the lawyer he had introduced her to, Kathy Rumler, who you will all remember, former Obama White House official, deputy White House chief counsel, with closing the deal. Here's how the exchange went. 45 mio, question mark, as we casually throw around these numbers. Rothschild asked Epstein in December 2015. He replied, counting a $10 million fee for the lawyers and $25 million for him, quote, I think you will find all less than 80 pretty good. She responds, deep thanks for your help. Days later, this gets announced. The Department of Justice, literally just days later, puts out this announcement saying, Justice Department announces joint resolution with two banks under the Swiss bank program. The Department of Justice announced today that Edmond de Rothschild and Edmond de Rothschild S.A. have reached a joint resolution under the department's Swiss bank program. EDR Switzerland will pay a penalty of more than $45 million, make a complete disclosure of the cross-border activities, etc. There is no public reporting at the time to indicate Epstein's role, but you will remember here, we now have a deal brokered by a private Swiss bank, the Rothschild, I mean literally one of the richest families in the history of Europe, who is working with Jeffrey Epstein days before and pays him $25 million. Potentially for what reason? Not just Kathy Rumler, but maybe for the connection, finder's fee, some sort of influence where he is able to negotiate this deal on behalf of this bank and the U.S. Department of Justice to the point where you can all see it and go back and read. There's no mention of him. What role did he play? Who did he call? I mean, that, if anything, shows the extent of influence. That right there is true influence. A private Swiss bank, some of the richest people in Europe, who call you and they're like, hey man, $25 million for what? For a $45 million settlement that's announced, but you got to be pulling some serious strings to merit more than half of what the overall settlement is going to be on top of the legal fees, which are already factoring in for this. What were they paying for? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, but it was announced just like they said. Cool 45 mil, exactly what he was saying, 45 mil, this is how it's gonna go. I can make sure that this all happened. I'm assuming you don't just pay somebody $25 million for nothing. So that is a very, very significant one.
Yeah.
That shows his level of influence. Seriously, like who did he call and what was he able to do to secure something like this? Because they'll pay anything to make something like that go away.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you look at these emails, you see elaborate communication with Ariane de Rothschild. They clearly had a very friendly relationship. Of course, she's downplaying, the bank is downplaying at this point, et cetera. You can read their statements. But they were really chummy. She was asking for advice on all kinds of personal, messy matters that were going on within the family. And he's there as the sounding board and, reliable friend for her to, bounce ideas off of, et cetera, and then is involved in this very direct, extremely significant, important way. I just saw this one that just Murtaza Hussein just pulled up that it looks like Epstein may have met with MBS 3 days before Jamal Khashoggi was murdered.
Wow.
And then we also had those other emails where he was talking about it, and he was, I think those were those with Bannon, I think, where he was texting back and forth in that particular exchange where he's talking about his theories about what happened there, and that's another question. Did he have inside knowledge on that one as well? But you just can see all of these connections with the most powerful people in the entire world. And you can also see from his communications, for example, with Peter Thiel and with others, and how they sort of view the world as just their plaything to exploit. With Libya, I think there's all kinds of money that can be had there, and talking about how the most financially profitable thing for them is global collapse and chaos and war, and that's what they actively hope for and wish for. I mean, you just see the way that they view things and how he somehow ends up in connection with all of these really powerful people at all these extraordinary moments in history. And, with this one with the Rothschilds, why it's so significant is because he directly appears to have had a hand in exactly what this settlement looked like down to the dollar amount. So it is completely wild. One more here. Let's put A15 up on the screen. You guys will recall, because we played it for you before, Howard Lutnick. Oh my God, my wife and I met Epstein, our next door neighbor in New York City, one time, and we were so disgusted that we said we will never have anything to do with him whatsoever. Well, he lied. I mean, there's just blatant lie. Now, I guess the best, maybe he forgot all of these interactions that he had with Epstein over the years. But let me go ahead and read this from the New York Times. Howard Lutnick, President Trump's billionaire commerce secretary, interacted with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein regularly over at least 13 years while they lived next door to one another on Manhattan's Upper East Side. They invested in the same privately held company together. Okay, so they were not just casual, they happened to be in the same social circles. No, I mean, there was that too. But they literally were business partners. You think that escaped his memory? He just forgot about that little detail with regard to his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Then it goes on to say they dealt with one another on neighborhood and philanthropic issues and appear to have socialized in New York and in the Caribbean, the records show. Mr. Epstein at one point even sought to meet with Mr. Lutnick's nanny. The records directly contradict Mr. Lutnick's assertion on a podcast last year that he had been so disgusted by Mr. Epstein during a 2005 visit to his townhouse that Mr. Lutnick had never set foot in a room with Mr. Epstein again. Quote, "So I was never in the room with him socially for business or even philanthropy," Mr. Lutnick said in an interview on the podcast Podforce One. Reached briefly by phone last week, Mr. Lutnick said, "I spent zero time with him." In any functioning society, this man would be fired. He would resign in disgrace, caught brazenly in a lie around this criminal, pedophile sex trafficker, and he would never be heard from again in public life. That's what a functioning society would look like. Instead, we know he will bear no price for this. There will be no problem. If anything, his associations with Epstein helped him get the gig. If anything, right? So the fact that we now know dead to rights this man was lying to our face in the most shameless way will have zero consequence for him and his future trajectory.
Yes, that is, I mean, not only do I agree, but look again at the UK government and how they're, I mean, Keir Starmer, a Labour leader this morning, is calling for him to resign over the Epstein scandal. The Mandelson thing has blown up their government. I saw that a Norwegian senior official was removed because of her links to Epstein. I mean, these way less than what we're talking about here with Lutnick, right? Because these people are just embarrassed by what happened. They didn't come out and say, oh, I never saw him again. And then you have all of these negotiations behind the scenes. You have the fact that he is a neighbor, which it already had raised questions. I had found an email where Epstein wanted to hire Lutnick's butler or something like that from back in the day. And I was like, oh, well, you know, you couldn't prove whether any of that happened. Well, now you put it all together and you're like, of course they knew each other. They knew each other very, very well, which just goes to the point about how it's a big club. None of us are in it. We can now just tiny glimpse into how power and all of that operates. If you have enough money, people will look the other way, or they'll actively participate, or they'll have knowledge and just, you know, kind of be quiet about it as it's all an internal protection club. You can be a genius when in fact all you're really doing is insider trading. You know, that's one thing for the Epstein defenders. Prove to me how he made his money. Prove to me how he made his money. Was he really, really good at what he did? Find me a great financial, find me like, who's the guy who we cover, Renaissance, I can't, Jim Simon, right? A Jim Simon figure or Ray Dalio to sit down and be like, here's why he was a master trader. Nobody said any of that.
Yeah.
Nothing. He was just a criminal. That's it, period. Blackmail and then, you know, insider trading and social connections. That's it. That's all it took to make all these billions. And then, you know, the bigger question is like, where'd all the money go? Who was it wired to? And remember, there's literally over $1 billion in suspicious activity reports sitting in the U.S. Department of Treasury right now, which has yet to be released.
Yeah.
That's where the real stuff is.
And it seems that insider trading nexus seems like the easiest place actually where you could get prosecutions. And I think that's playing out in the UK for sure. And the last thing I want to say is we don't talk as much about the Epstein Ranch in New Mexico.
Oh, yeah, and they never raided it.
And it appears they never raided it. They never investigated there, even though we know from, you know, significant reporting and more details added through this latest release that he wanted to use that ranch as this sort of like, you know, as his spread his seed eugenics breeding ground project. That was what he wanted to do. Now, did he accomplish that, and who was involved, and was it, you know, was it consensual, or was any of this against their will, et cetera? We're never going to probably know. And the other thing is he had connections in the same way that he, you know, paid off a bunch of Virgin Island politicians to be able to do whatever he wanted on his private island. He also was deeply enmeshed with a number of New Mexico politicians, including the former governor. So, you know, I think that angle has been wildly, invisibilized and unexplored as well. So it's just, I mean, it's sick. What else can you say? And you see the way that it operated as there was this sort of like mutually assured destruction among all these powerful people. And that's how they sort of built these, I mean, it's sick, but that's how they built these relationships of trust. Is like, I know you can't leave, you can't blow the whistle because I know you know what I did and I know what you did. And, and Epstein seems to have been a master at manipulation, in so many of these communications, whether it's with business partners or world leaders or with, girls or women that he's exploiting. The emotional blackmail and manipulation is very clear in his communication. So he seems to have been a master of manipulating this, elite power circle that he was one node of.
All right, let's get to Iran. Speaking of elite power circles.